So we're looking to analyze Sam Harris's recent, I believe it's on Substack. It's his post starting from scratch. He's talking about his experience with the California wildfires. Okay, so you go down. He says sometimes you can feel your politics change in an instant. And he's talking about as he's fleeing the fire, he's learning that looters are breaking into homes nearby. And so he goes on to say, I noticed that the phrase police death squads had a nice ring to it. So what he's talking about here is just that idea of like when there's chaos and when people feel like there's criminals that are out and about, the idea of police that are just like brutally cracking down on people that are committing crimes, that's like a really appealing idea. That's an idea that a lot more people are going to get behind than they normally will. Right. And so historically, these death squads, like police death squads, they would carry out like extrajudicial killings. Right. They would sometimes do like targeted assassinations. They would enforce disappearances. And that happened a lot in like Latin America, countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile, for example. Okay, but he goes on to say, computers in our pockets give us access to nearly every earthly utterance. What was really happening in my city, given this squalid state of our information landscape, it was impossible to know. Okay, he talks about how as he learns of like what's going on, he decides what to gather, and he gets his daughter's favorite stuffed animals, 2 cats, and a gun, bottle of MDMA. Then he said that the one object of sentimental value he grabbed was something from his days in India. So it's a mala from his days in India and Nepal. Okay. Talks about just maybe the incompatibility that people would see in having a mala and a gun, but how he's someone that's like the two sides of his personality. Based on several reports I received in the middle of the night, I became nearly certain we had lost our home. Later evidence convinced me that it was spared, while 2 doors away, houses were destroyed. Okay, he goes on to say they haven't been able to go to the street. They haven't been able to return to the street to see it for themselves, but that they're learning of more friends and acquaintances who've lost everything. Okay, highlights much of our world's vanished. Daughter's school appears to have been burned. Only partially, it might be rebuilt in the future. Many other places that were part of their daily lives literally obliterated. Okay, he's only seen pictures and video, but they reveal a landscape that resembles Hiroshima. Okay, he goes on to talk about learning of this in social media. Assessing this wider reality from my phone and computer, the opposing faces of social media have never been more evident. X is an endless scroll of potentially life-saving information, dangerous lies, political opportunism, and patent insanity, punctuated by the unforgivable antics of its owner. Talking of Musk, right? He's very critical of Musk. Sam and Elon were once friends. Sam now is probably one of the most well-known critics of Elon, and he stayed consistent in that for years. Okay, I've been amazed by the compassion shared between perfect strangers, and just as amazed by the schadenfreude of others. Okay, yes, many of the people who lost their homes are rich or were. We will soon learn that many were uninsured and some were famous, but many are neither of those things. Okay, talks about resentment and class hatred on display. Talks about how he views it as like a growing political emergency. He's not really referencing the Luigi thing, but that's part of it. You see that a lot of people are, especially if it's perceived that someone gained their wealth like less ethically, there's a lot of anger toward that. Okay, social media and the internet have been compared to electricity, and that our lives would now be unthinkable without them, but they are only like electricity if the risk of electrocution were vastly greater than it is. Information technology is not going away. It cannot persist in its current form. There will be weeks, months, and perhaps years of second guessing and recrimination. Okay, analyzing whether or not we could have adequately responded to such a catastrophe. There's no question that we must prepare better for the next one. Okay, right here, he's going to appeal to wealthy people. He's going to basically give them like a challenge and highlight how this could help society, how this could benefit society. So he goes on to say, okay, basically millionaires, like he's talking here of like people probably with net worths of like 80 million up going into billions. I know Sam has a net worth. Last I read, it was like 4 million. I mean, he's comfortable, but you really can't say that he's like really wealthy in today's world when you look at inflation. Maybe in the world, but not in the US. Okay, he says this is the moment to recognize what wealth is really for. We must rebuild. We must create a culture of competence and social cohesion and transform our politics in the process. I believe this process can only start with historic acts of generosity on the part of the wealthiest residents of California. Okay, he talks about Stuart and Linda Resnick, 12 billion net worth. They have a lot of businesses. He's saying that we shouldn't begrudge basically that they are using like estate planning to pass down a lot of money to their kids. Talks about Resnick's businesses consume an extraordinary amount of water, but there's nothing illegal about it. Talks about how they're being vilified as symbols of all that's wrong with capitalism. He goes on to say there's nothing wrong with capitalism that an ethical relationship to wealth can't fix. Some are going to disagree with that and say that just people having that kind of power and the huge discrepancies in power are wrong. But let's hear out Sam. Let's hear what he says. He says, I have a proposal for the Resnicks and for every other wealthy person who has deep ties to Los Angeles. Identify the portion of your wealth that has no conceivable impact on your quality of life. I'm talking about what is and will always be just a number on the spreadsheet. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything beyond the idea of how wealthy you are on paper. If you're a billionaire and have your heart set on a Gulf Stream, by all means, get one and enjoy it. Okay, I'm simply observing that people who have 1 billion live exactly like those who have 10 billion or 100 billion. I see what Sam's saying here. I'm not completely convinced, right? When I'm hearing that you have people like Zuck and Bezos and some of them, I mean, Bezos had like, I think it was a $600 million wedding. If you have 1 billion in net worth, you're not having a $600 million wedding. So I agree with Sam on a lot of things, but I do question if it's maybe being too simplistic here. Okay, whatever your level of wealth, there is likely a portion of it that will always just remain a number. Why not deploy those resources now to resurrect the city you love? So even though I disagree maybe with the specifics on what he's getting at, I can agree with the message that we want to have a culture where people are giving money, where people are trying to use their wealth to make the world a better place. Okay, if this proposal sounds simply crazy, imagine how you'd respond if Linda Resnick held a press conference tomorrow and said the following. Our families lived in LA 50 years. Stuart and I got married here, built businesses here. And ultimate reason we've amassed these resources, apart from living secure and happy lives, is to help others. You may have noticed many buildings in this town with our names on them, and I'm happy to say most of them are still standing. However, fires have destroyed so much of this city. It led us to think about our responsibilities in a new way. Okay, so he's basically highlighting if they were to come out, and say this, like if they were to come out and say like how fortunate we feel to be able to do something useful at this moment, and if they were to like then donate a lot of like money, for example, that would change people's perspective, right? So he goes down, it's just her talking more and more, but so to that end, we're immediately donating 90% of our wealth, okay, to the state of California, earmarked for the reconstruction of Los Angeles. He's saying if they were to do that, that it would reduce cynicism, right? He's saying, how do you think a gesture like that would be received? Would it increase the level of cynicism in our society or reduce it? Of course, it would reduce it. And I think that would be great if there were people doing that. I think Sam's maybe hoping that there are wealthy people that read his Substack and that listen to his podcast that will then take action. And I think that would be great if that's the case. I know that on his podcast, he's talked about the importance of the wealthy giving a lot, but I'm not 100% convinced that many people will do that. That'd be great if they do, right? He's saying, Sam's saying here, I'm merely suggesting that a historic act of philanthropy could transform not merely a physical landscape, but the political and cultural one as well. We should all want to live in a world that produces enormous wealth, but we should also want that wealth to be deployed when it is truly needed. I agree with Sam to an extent. I do agree that we want to live in a society that produces enormous wealth, but maybe it's just my study of history, my study of politics, maybe a little bit of economics. Often when enormous wealth is produced, there's the question of like, where did it come from, right? And sometimes it is created by incredible innovations and people working extremely hard, and sometimes it is created in large part by exploiting. Right? If you have Walmart as a very like wealthy business, how many ma and pa shops went out as Walmart was created? And then if Walmart, if they then expand globally and they're in Mexico and they're all over the world, how many mom and pop shops in Mexico were destroyed, or other grocery stores were kind of ran out in those areas where Walmart is being put in other countries, and all the wealth is flowing back to the Waltons. So when he says we want to live in a society that produces wealth, yes, we do, but we also want to live in a society that has a good safety net. I don't think that the idea is that we have a few people getting wildly wealthy and then we just say, oh, well, it's fine as long as they are able to give a lot in charity, right? That's fine as long as they're able to give a lot in charity and can pat themselves on the back. Then that's fine if we lose a ton of jobs to automation and if wealth is increasingly concentrated. So even though I like a lot of what Sam says on the topic of Islam, I agree with much of what he says about Trump and much of what he says about politics. And I do think it would be good for wealthy people to donate money. I sometimes wonder if he dives into some of the deeper ideas with economics, right? When he says we should want to live in a society that produces enormous wealth, that's a very like simplistic idea. Produces wealth for who? Is it wealth that's being used to benefit everyone? Does everyone's life get better from this wealth that's produced, or is only a few people's lives getting better and other people more wealth is being extracted from them? We live in a society where wealth is literally just extracted from average people every day, and it's just flowing toward the top people that like money's getting taken, parking tickets, who owns like those parking lots, right? Like insurance, rent. We want a society where we have widespread ownership of homes and not corporations just basically gobbling up all the available homes. So just some stuff from Sam here. I do like the message, but I'm gonna kind of expound a little bit on that, right, with my economic analysis. Okay, thanks for watching. That's it for today.